US earnings season is upon us, and the critical question is what effect will falling oil prices have on company profits? Now, to demonstrate just how dramatic the fall in oil prices has been, it's now down more than 60% in terms of Brent crude from the top last year. Let's take a look at oil prices in terms of gold. You can see that when you measure oil in terms of gold, it is as cheap as it has been since 1999, when Brent crude was selling at about $10 per barrel. This is quite a remarkable sell-off, and plainly it has an effect on earnings. For virtually every company out there, oil is either a significant cost or a significant source of revenue. Now, when it comes to the earnings season for the fourth quarter of 2014, you've already seen the impact of oil on companies that rely on it for revenues, on energy companies, very significantly written into expectations, as you can see from this chart, which was produced for us by S&P Capital IQ. However, you do not yet see much in the way of upgrades for companies that might benefit from cheaper oil, such as most obviously consumer discretionary companies. Now, why is that? Perhaps the most obvious reason is that it's all part of the game of earnings management, that CEOs want to create as low expectations as possible ahead of the results so that they can then get a nice little pop when they beat their lowered bar. There's also, however, an element to do with the dollar in this. Part of cheap oil is that it helps strengthen the dollar. A strong dollar is bad news for any of the many companies in the S&P that derive a lot of their earnings from overseas. What you might well find in the next few weeks is that any CEO who has some poor results to announce is going to use the strong dollar as an excuse. As for the next few days, we'll be hearing from most of the big banks, and the critical question from them is whether the flattening in the yield curve over the last few weeks, which would normally be expected to dent banks' profits, whether that flattening of the yield curve has affected their outlook for the next year. That's a very important question. After that, people badly want to hear from the oil companies themselves, get their assessment of the demand and supply, given that the fall in oil prices is now of historic proportions. Either way you look at it, this earnings season is going to be more important and more complicated than many.